for people of my age, the Iraq War was one of those key cornerstone moments, and then Brexit happened. And as Zach Polanski has done it, I also joined the Liberal Democrats around that time. And coming from a place of being a musician, being around Europe a lot, going on tours, you really see the impact that Brexit is going to be, that barrier to travel, barrier to take your instrument. As a violinist, often you've got an historic instrument that is built with historic parts, like ivory. You've then got to get a special license for that. Previous to that, you could just take it with you. Wow. So we've put all these barriers up. Slowly we're trying to wind them all back, but because I play buck just 100 yards and completely forgotten about, and you've got at that point 7 years of austerity, and you can see the decline. And then so many things come out around the leadership in South Tyneside, as well as being left behind, and I was like, okay, I need to do something about this. We've got a pub that is being torn down as we record today. I went out and did some socials for that, and it's taken 15 years to move on that. It's a very complicated legal process. I had to read up on the sort of type of property retrieval processes that the council could have done, but that leaves a population of about 5,000 people with no pub. Pub's being demolished and the other pub is being converted into an Asda. So we've got a community now where there is no space to come together. I was just reading some comments on it online, and both her gran and her mum's wake was in that pub. And so there's nowhere for the community at the moment to come together for those significant life events. I was looking on one chap, and he was living one part of the ward, but his mum's living in another, and he was saying, I can't get my mum up and down the pavements, so can we put in the drop curbs? And I was like, absolutely, that's just an easy win. And you go around and you think, all right, the council at some point have done some of this project, they've just not followed through. The irony is, it's like, I wanted to do the job properly and audit all of them. Well, that didn't actually quite happen. Like we did sort of the bit that I was thinking about, but I've actually asked to do everything, all of these pedestrianised walks. So I've actually go back again this year to get the funding to finish the job.
There's a quiet kind of change happening here in the Northeast. Not the headline stuff, but the real kind, led by people who genuinely care about their communities. I'm Jonathan Elmer, and this is Greens Rising, the podcast for anyone who wants to turn hope into action. Today's guest is Chris Davies. He's a music teacher turned Green councillor, multi-instrumentalist and dad of two. Chris came into politics through Brexit, inequality, and a fierce belief that people deserve better than the status quo. He represents the people of Biddick and All Saints Ward in South Tyneside, and his work on accessible streets, honest local government and tackling far-right intimidation has already made waves. He's thoughtful, grounded and properly committed to the people he serves. If you want a dose of real hope, the practical kind, you'll enjoy hearing from Chris in today's episode. So Chris, you've got one of those CVs that really does cover quite a lot in terms of work, the things you do in, that just enjoyment of life. A talented musician by the looks of things. You lead a choir. You're a councillor. So tell me a little bit about yourself outside of politics.
So I would say a misspent youth, but it was perhaps a misspent youth because I just couldn't do anything else. So every night of the week I was out doing something. There was a male voice choir, brass band, string orchestra. I was kept very busy and never had a free weekend.
Excellent. So how does a singing teacher from Plymouth end up in South Tyneside politics? Was there a turning point for you, or did it creep up slowly?
I think for people of my age, the Iraq War was one of those key cornerstone moments. And then moving to the Northeast, I was just like, there is always going to be better than the status quo here. And then Brexit happened. And as Zach Polanski has done it, I also joined the Liberal Democrats around that time. And coming from a place of being a musician, being around Europe a lot, going on tours, you really see the impact that Brexit is going to be, that barrier to travel, barrier to take your instrument. As a violinist, often you've got an historic instrument that is built with historic parts, like ivory. You've then got to get a special license for that. So we've put all these barriers up. Slowly we're trying to wind them all back. But,
It's interesting. I had a conversation with somebody in my ward where I'm a councillor whose business was actually importing musical instruments and trading musical instruments. And his business has simply been closed down by Brexit. He just wasn't able to do anything that involved customs as efficiently as he used to be able to do. And it hit his profit margins to such an extent that he lost his business.
yeah. Once I finally settled down and ended up living in the northeast, my wife got a job at the Freeman in Newcastle, working on the paediatric intensive care unit there. And we were in the run-up to Brexit and Scottish referendum at the time. And we then moved to South Shields, moved to South Tyneside, and there's a play park just 100 yards and completely forgotten about. And you've got, at that point, 7 years of austerity, and you can see the decline. And then so many things come out around the leadership in South Tyneside, as well as being left behind. And I was like, okay, I need to do something about this. So I got more involved in my local community. I was part of the Liberal Democrats at the time. I think that's quite cool to go Liberal Democrat to Green.
It's quite a big jump.
Well, from that, it's the Social Democrat side of things. They had that platform around the green issues, which is really important. So I didn't feel that it was too far of me to move.
Yeah.
And at the time in South Tyneside, Greens were getting things done. And David Francis just kept going at me. I met him in the pub and he was like, "You'd make a good councillor." I was like, "Thanks." And hadn't really thought about it, but I knew I could definitely work harder than the current crop of councillors. And finally, on a January cold night, I was like, yeah,
Let's
okay,
do it.
I'll take the plunge.
Fantastic. So you're someone that's toured Europe with choirs and bands. Do you feel like that sense of freedom and movement shaped you in terms of how you see politics, how things should be?
Yeah. What's always grounded me is that sense of place. And you can see when you go to communities across Europe, how grounded they are in that sense of place. And local government's really key to that. One challenge I find to get very complicated in local government structures is that unlike somewhere like Durham or Northumberland, where you've got parishes to improve the local area, unitary authority councillors like South Tyneside or Newcastle, you've got 3 people that are trying to do it all, and you haven't got this much more locally connected committee with a budget and budget raising powers to make that difference. So not only have I got to look after potholes and flower beds, but I've got to look after a £14 billion pension fund collectively.
Yeah, so that's the crazy thing about being a councillor, isn't it? Actually, I get a lot of satisfaction out of addressing those smaller issues because I know that they mean so much to people's quality of life, but then there's the really big issues as well. Yeah. When you were voted in, you won the election by something like 70% of the vote. That's just enormous, wild numbers. So what does that tell you about what people wanted in your ward?
Now, I'll caveat this. It was just me and Labour. However, what I did do, and I think this is perhaps testament to the hard work that I did through that campaign, is increase the vote share. Through that hard work, through that green messaging, we were able to increase that voter turnout, increase people that voted on the day. So, yeah, really positive story.
Leading on from that, you've talked a lot about honesty, graft, solidarity. When you're thinking about your ward, which has high unemployment, low literacy, big pockets of social housing, what guides the way you show up for people? What are your priorities in supporting that community?
I am really grounded in that solidarity. I know that I don't have the same experience and I've had incredible life chances, but that doesn't mean that I need to draw up the ladder behind me. That means I need to double down on making sure that people can move forward. Biddickel Juniors does incredible things. They are in the top 1% of primary schools last year for their SATS results. They are far and beyond achieving what, on a demographics point of view, looking at the data, they might be doing otherwise in different contexts. So the staff there in that school absolutely are doing a phenomenal job. But the council and councillors haven't been showing up for the community. We've got a pub that is being torn down as we record today. I went out and did some socials for that, and it's taken 15 years to move on that.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated legal process. I had to read up on the sort of type of property retrieval processes that the council could have done, but that leaves a population of about 5,000 people with no pub. Pub's being demolished and the other pub is being converted into an Asda. So we've got a community now where there is no space to come together. I was just reading some comments on it online, and both her gran and her mum's wake was in that pub. And so there's nowhere for the community at the moment to come together for those significant life events.
I mean, we've talked about this in the various podcasts we've done on a number of occasions. The continual erosion of these sorts of community networks, facilities that enable people just to work, play, be together are slowly vanishing. Pubs in particular, but community centres, youth clubs, there used to be so many of them, all gone now. And we're ending up with just those spaces being taken up with housing by and large.
And I'm sure Rachel probably said a few things on her episode that I will listen to it when it comes out.
Yeah.
The extra care facility that's gone in where, Rachel grew up and so many kids were there playing football. The South Tyneside Orchestra used to meet there. That's been replaced with one room. So the Pride in Place funding that is coming from the government for this ward, really well structured in terms of making sure that the money is going to be delivered out from the people. The neighbourhood is going to be deciding how that money is allocated, not the big wigs in the town council.
So now we've talked about some big issues there. Again, that's the thing about being a councillor. You get to deal with the day-to-day stuff as well. And actually, I find that very satisfactory. But what are the things you've managed to shift recently that make you think that's why I stood?
I think partly is through that campaigning. Like, you are there probably more than the only person that probably sees more streets than you do on that frequency as when you're through door knocking is the postman.
Yes.
And at the speed of walking gives you such great insight as to what people are seeing. Plus, then obviously talking to people. So, I was looking on one chap and he was living one part of the ward, but his mum was living in another. And he was saying, I can't get my mum up and down the pavements. So can we put in the drop curbs? And I was like, absolutely. That's just an easy win. And you go around and you think, all right, the council at some point have done some of this project, but they've just not followed through. And why did this stop? And I go and ask officers and they're like, yeah, we don't know when it stopped. We don't know really why it stopped. The irony is, it's like, I wanted to do the job properly and audit all of them. Well, that didn't actually quite happen. We did sort of the bit that I was thinking about, but I'd actually asked to do everything, all of these pedestrianised walks. So I've actually go back again this year to get the funding to actually finish the job.
If we walked your ward together, what would you point at and say, that's something I'm proud of?
There's a number of potholes, because potholes, there's the tolerance that you need for a pothole. And so I've devised myself a little pencil with a little notch to just dip a pothole to see if it's deep enough. But there's a mineral line, an ex-railway track that runs through the ward, and slowly we're going to be infilling that with native hedgerows and said, can we put some sloe bushes or some damsons in there and, sort of make some fruiting trees? And we could, but, obviously that increase the cost. So it's just been whips with a couple of standing trees. Then, it is those bigger things, getting the Pickwick demolished, consulting our residents with whether you want the planning permission on the pub approved, and working towards getting that community resource put back in after the loss of the shooter reed.
You'll have had conversations, no doubt, with so many people as you've been door knocking. When you're talking to people on the doorstep, what are your Green voters saying? And by and large, they'll have all switched from Labour. Why do they switch? Why do they move from Labour to Green? And do you think they'll stay Green with, obviously, Reform now coming on the scene?
I think because of that constant messaging that we have, people are informed. And that's partly because of our collective efforts. We're able to pool that resource.
You're really working hard to tell people what you've done, though.
Yeah. And staying out on the doors, not going back into a silo. But the MP, she loves knocking up in Biddical. There's another all-green ward where she only really goes to the Asda.
In my ward, there are some very high-profile Lib Dem councillors, the Durham MP, and I'm not going to mention any names, but they've all sneakily come up to me and said, I'm so glad I'm in a green ward. Anyway, Chris.
We get things done.
We do. We get things done. And we care. Yeah. Now, your ward has been called the epicentre of the flag flying. You actually reached out to the person organising this in your ward. So tell me about that conversation.
I think partly because I was like, the council at some point are going to come down and take the flags down. They are unauthorised. It's a right of protest. Absolutely. Fundamentally, if you want to do this and make that protest, you carry on.
Yeah.
But as the organiser, and you're sort of asking people for more money to put flags up around the estate, you've got that position of kind of authority. So I reached out to him and sort of was like, the council will come down and take these flags down. Can we kind of get to a point where we get a compromise? We could put up a flagpole in the middle of the shops. There's a county council that's spending £75,000 to put up authorised displays.
Yeah.
But it's like, if they take them down, I want my flags back, alongside all the other things. They're not racist. They're not intimidatory. What's wrong with putting up the national flag?
It's interesting because I've had a similar experience in my division as well. It's divisive. It does make people feel like this is no longer their home, and that must be awful.
There was a video shared online of two girls that went round taking some of the flags down that they could reach. They'd sort of already slipped a little bit and they went to pull them down. And some of the people associated with this campaign went round to their house of an evening and asked for their flags back. But online, they were like, you're going to get sprayed.
Another issue is that we know in local politics that what's so important is that local residents in an area feel that they have control over the decisions made that affect their lives. Now, certainly large parts of my ward, people don't want the flags, and they didn't ask for them, and they're telling me that we really would like them removed, but there's nothing I can do to remove them because this is a reform council. So this is another example of things being done to people. And that's exactly what we're trying to get away from in politics. We're trying to empower people to be in control of decision making, and this sort of thing actually moves away from that.
And what's come at the same time is the Pride in Place initiative out of the government. And that is putting £20 million over 10 years into the ward, where the neighbourhood is going to absolutely be in control of that spending. And what I'm able to do is think about the issues that keep coming up, the quality of the housing stock, the windows and doors, they're coming to the end of their life, and the council are like, 5-7 years, insulation's good, everything's fine. But actually people's lived experiences is completely different to that.
Okay, let's start to look at the bigger picture now. Do you think it's immigration that's causing problems for people ultimately?
It's years of austerity, and it's a community that has been done unto for a very long time. And what we're able to do is put that enfranchisement back out. The council tax burden on people in Billick and All Saints is astronomical compared to what you pay when you live in Westminster. And we've got some okay houses. They're paying £2,500 a year.
Isn't that an outrage that the bills facing people who live in some of the poorest parts of the country are much, much higher than the bills faced by those people living in the richest parts of the country? There couldn't be a better example of inequality in our country than that.
Yeah.
Chris, let's just end with sort of a lift, something a little bit more hopeful. If everything went right for you as a councillor and your broader Green group on South Tyneside, what does South Tyneside start to look like?
Yeah, I think better connections to hospitals. We've got a shuttle service between South Tyneside and Sunderland Hospital.
Yeah.
Led a petition on that. We have real good connection to healthy food. We've got that connection to jobs. We've got that skills training coming in, and people have got that connection to their community. They see that investment and revitalisation that we can bring when we build community together.
Yeah, brilliant. Chris, it's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. I hope people get a much richer understanding of who you are and what you're trying to achieve in your council area. Thank you so much for being our guest in this episode of Green Rising. I hope things go well for you in the future.
Thank you for inviting me.
That was Chris Davies, showing exactly what practical hope looks like in real life. If today made you rethink what local politics can be, please like, subscribe and share. Thanks for listening to Greens Rising. More stories of real change coming soon.